Welcome everyone to tonight's Civic Awareness Series. My name is Sian Beilock. I am the Director of Operations for the Mccormick House. We're very excited to have our subject and our presenter here tonight. But I want to first of all again welcome you again. But I want to talk to you really briefly about some of the technical and logistical parts of this program. You may have realized that we do have closed captioning for this program. We have a couple options for closed captioning, and you see some of those instructions in yellow there. But if you want to adjust the closed captioning, on the bottom of your screen, there's a little black box with two white CCs, closed captioning. If you don't want the transcript of the closed captioning, you can actually push that or hover above that symbol and push hide subtitles, and that will make it go away. If you change your mind, you decide you like subtitles, the closed captioning, click back on that box, and if you want to adjust the size of the font of the closed captioning, you can do it that way. So I want to give you some brief history of the Cantinia Park, and while I talk, you can adjust your transcripts and close your closed captioning while I do that. One thing we realized last month when we did our October Civic Awareness Series is that someone told us that when we spoke the word or the phrase civic awareness, it came across on the subtitles as civic weirdness. So that's kind of a fun thing so that might occur. This closed captioning is a great feature to have for Zoom, but we did some calculations and it's about 80–85% correct. So we think it'll work out well. But if you see civic weirdness, it's kind of a fun thing. Cheney is in partnership with the League of Women Voters of Glen Ellen and the League of Women Voters of Wheaton to bring you this this presentation, this event. We do that because our missions align here at Cheney and with the League of Women Voters in a lot of ways. We are here today at Cheney because of a man named Robert Rutherford McCormick, or Colonel McCormick, as we call him here. And if you don't know who Colonel McCormick was, he was the editor, publisher of the Chicago Tribune from 1911 until his death in 1955. He's probably best known for that. But he also was the founder of WGN Radio and Television. And he is the inspiration, the builder for Tribune Tower. That was completed in 1925. And in that year, when that building was brand new, it was the world's most expensive office building. But Cheney was Robert McCormick's suburban estate. This was his grandfather's home, Joseph Medill. And he loved coming out here in the 30s, 40s, and the 50s. He actually died in the house in 1955. And not only did Robert McCormick was a great civic champion during his time, but having such a large family, there are a lot of family members that we can draw from to tell stories. And tonight give us an opportunity to tell about one of Robert's relatives that had a lot to do with women's rights in the 20th century. Now, Robert McCormick was the youngest of two siblings. He had an older brother, Joseph Medill McCormick, that was about 2 years older than he was. And Joseph Medill McCormick had a brief but very successful political career. He died very young in 1926. His wife, Ruth McCormick, sort of took his baton after he died, and she she did a lot of stuff. She came from this political family, the Hannas from Ohio. She was an activist, a supporter. She was a suffragist, a publisher of newspapers, but she accomplished some milestones I want to share with you. I'm going to read this because I don't want to get it wrong. In 1930, as a Republican, she defeated a Democrat named Charles Deanan for the Republican nomination, the Republican primary for senator for the state of Illinois. She was the first woman to have that success politically. Now, unfortunately for Ruth Hannas, she lost the primary. We lost the general election a couple of months later. And she lost it for a couple of, I would argue, some feeble reasons. She was a member of the powerful McCormick family. Of course, the McCormicks were pretty wealthy in the area. That didn't do too well for her, in the Great Depression. She also was a supporter of prohibition, which was losing popularity pretty severely at the time. So she lost that election, but she was the first woman in American history to get an election to primary from a major American party, Democrat or Republican. So that's one accomplishment. And a decade later, in 1940, she served as Thomas Dewey's presidential campaign manager. And she was the first woman in American history to do that. So a real brief bio of Ruth Hannah McCormick, to give you an idea of, we ought to do things here that are mission related. So it also gives me an opportunity to tell you a story, one of our favorite characters in our story. So hope you had time to check out the transcripts of the closed captioning and get everything settled and ready to roll, because I'm going to turn it over to our guest tonight, Miss Jody Baltimore, who's going to introduce our guest as we go forward. Now, one more thing. You guys are here tonight. You've been muted and your cameras are turned off. But in the course of tonight, if you have a question, push that Q&A button and we'll do our best to answer those questions as we go along tonight. Again, my name is Will. Thank you for being here. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and turn it over to Jody.
Great, thank you, Will. I have the pleasure tonight to introduce our speaker, Rebecca Saive. Rebecca is a seasoned political analyst, women's leadership strategist, and an advocate for women's equality and opportunity. She is the author of 3 books: Make Her Story Your Story, Your Guided Journal to Justice Every Day for Every Woman, which will be available in January of 2022. Her second book, Vote Her In, Your Guide to Electing Our First Woman President, and another, Every Day is Election Day, A Woman's Guide to Winning Any Office from the PTA to the White House. Sive co-produces and co-hosts the podcast #VoteHerIn in collaboration with the Two Broads Talking Politics podcast. Sive's articles and op-eds have appeared in the Huffington Post, Crane Chicago Business, The Hill, at MSNBC, in the Chronicle of Philanthropy, and elsewhere. Her career has spanned executive positions in government, philanthropy, academia, business, and the not-for-profit sector. She founded the University of Chicago Harris School of Public Policy 2015 Women's Public Leadership Initiative. She was a founding commissioner of the Illinois Human Rights Commission, served as an advisor to Chicago's first African-American mayor, Harold Washington, founded one of the nation's first women's centers, and was among the national leaders who developed women's issues agendas for 2 presidents. She is listed in the biographical dictionary, Feminists Who Changed America, has received distinguished achievement awards from the Illinois General Assembly and her alma mater called Carleton College and the University of Illinois, among others. Rebecca has spoken at colleges and universities, corporations, national nonprofits, and associations. She speaks about strategies for women to gain power and influence in the public square, including as elected and appointed officials. Why electing a woman president of the United States as soon as possible is critical to our national healthy future, and the movement of women into executive leadership everywhere, and how women across generations, experiences, and backgrounds can, together, advance equality for every woman. Please help me welcome Rebecca Saive.
Good evening, everybody, and thanks so much, Will and Jody, for having me here, and everyone else who put this program together. It's really a treat. I want to say that for starters, it's particularly special to be gathered with people who are in the League of Women Voters. I personally have a long history with it and hope that I can talk a bit about that with you. As Jody said, what we're going to talk about tonight is basically the idea that every year is the year of the woman. Every year is the year of the woman to be a leader in public service, in government, in public affairs, in charitable ways in the community. And that's why I'm so glad Will talked about the McCormick family and Ruth Hannah's role. I had shared with a couple of the planning committee members that actually one of my dearest friends is a descendant, and he speaks so fondly of the heritage that she transmitted to the next generation. So thank you for this bit of history and context. So I'm going to share with you thoughts for a while here, and then we'll get to a Q&A. And first, what I want to do is just give you a little bit of background, because I think for all of us who seek to make her story, right, and to make it our story, it's important to evaluate where we've come from and how that has helped us find this path that we want to proceed on. So I begin by telling you a bit about my own personal background, which really has everything to do with why I'm an advocate today for women's equal rights advancement, professionally and otherwise, and leadership in the public square. So here's my story. My mother was an immigrant. My father was the first in his family to go to college. He and my mother met while in law school at Columbia University in 1948, just a few years before Justice Ginsburg was there. My mother was auditing classes, but my father graduated and became a lawyer, focusing in the latter years of his practice on matters related to environmental justice, law, and policy. My mother was very active in local politics, and importantly, was the first woman president of our local school board. So as you might imagine from knowing their backgrounds, they instilled in me the notion that public service ought to be a primary focus of everyone's life, and it has been for me. I heeded their call. I really had no choice, and was a Girl Scout and did a lot of other things in high school along those lines, and a campus leader on women's issues while I was in college. When I came to Chicago to study urban policy and politics after college, I fell in love with the city. I convinced my then boyfriend, soon to be husband, to move here with me, and we did so in the 1970s, and have lived in Chicago ever since and been active here. So my activity, as I mentioned, has centered around women's rights and opportunities, and particularly their engagement in the public square. So I was myself very fortunate in this respect, because at the age of 28, I was first appointed to a position in government, and went on to serve in a number of roles for about a dozen years, both in the state of Illinois and the city of Chicago. So I want to mention, speaking of the Republican Party, as you were, Will, that I'm particularly proud of having been appointed by Illinois Governor Jim Thompson, a Republican, as you know, to the founding body of the Illinois Human Rights Commission. And he really gave me a very special opportunity, as he did to the other commissioners, to, so to speak, put our convictions front and center in serving the people of Illinois and seeking to end discriminatory practices. So since then, I've worked with a number of women leaders and organizations really for several decades, and learned a great deal from them about why it is so important for women to be engaged in civic life. So what I'm going to do this evening is share some of those findings and the themes surrounding them and the lessons learned from what I have seen and heard and discussed with my sisters. First, some context though for this analysis. I want just to recall, I'm not sure anyone here who's a league member could forget, but it's only been 100 years since the 19th Amendment to the Constitution was passed, granting suffrage. And the point there is that for over 150 years prior to that, women voters had no role in our democracy. So it's only really been, and this is worth thinking about deeply, 4 or 5 generations of women who've both been voters and able to be activists. And that is something that back in the day women couldn't do. They had to find a different path. And secondly, it's only been barely, by my calculations, 50 years since women have been observable, except in really modest numbers, in public office. So a couple examples of that for you contextually. The first is, and this is something I've seen because I've been going back and forth to Springfield for a lot of years. Think about the really significant changes in the Illinois legislature since the 1970s. The legislature now, I think, is close to 40% female. Think also about the number of women mayors around our state. Think about the number of school board members, commissioners of various sorts who hold public office here. I'm guessing some of them are in this gathering this evening. And it's now customary, but it wasn't that long ago when it wasn't, for women as appointed officials to run really big line departments of government. So for instance, it was only in the 1980s when the city of Chicago had its first commissioners of, for instance, sanitation and planning. Before that, it was unheard of for a woman to run any department other than either consumer affairs or human services, which were unfortunately much smaller. And another data point I want us to think about, it was only in the 2000s, less than 20 years ago, that Illinois elected its first woman attorney general. And here we are in 2021, nigh on 2022, never having elected a woman governor. So I give you these data points to say, sort of bottom line, that while there's been progress, there's still a mighty long way to go to achieve significant representation, not to mention parity. So the question I guess you might be thinking about, my having said this to you, is why is it that this movement of women into public office is so important? Why is that, and should it be a path for women to make their stories? Well, I'm going to give you a few reasons, a few answers to that question. First, and they're all important, but first, it is women legislators and women executives who promulgate and advocate policies benefiting women, girls, and their families. They take the lead on those kinds of policy initiatives, whether legislative or administrative. But for them, frankly, who knows where we would be on such issues as domestic violence, childcare, and equal pay. So it's unfortunately the case that male legislators have just not played the same leadership role on these issues, which are so vital to the health of every family. And the few who have, I think, are the exceptions that prove the rule. Secondly, it's really important in the case of women holding executive political power, and we'll talk a little bit more about why so few do in a minute, so that to show that women can run anything. It's not just a saying, it's a truth, that they can successfully be behind the big desk where the buck stops, right? By themselves and in charge, just as men have been for hundreds of years in public office in the United States. Third, when women are visibly in power and have influence over the public policy decisions that affect people's lives, they demonstrate to girls that they too can aspire to such roles. That saying, you can't be what you can't see, applies here. So I want to turn now to the themes I mentioned a moment ago of women's engagement in public leadership, and then I'll go to lessons. So to do so, when I get to the lessons, I'll share some stories, but first to the themes, of which there are several, and I imagine these will resonate among a number of you here, and you may even have some to add to the list. The first one is this: when women run, women win. The data shows this. So the point there is that if women candidates, just like their male counterparts, have other factors in place in terms of running for office, for instance, a compelling message, being a good campaigner, having a clear policy agenda, having relevant prior experience, they win. So don't let anyone tell you that, well, by thinking about having a woman run, our odds are worse. They are not. The second theme here that's really important in this day and age when money is so vital to politics, we can talk about the merits of that at some other time. Women can and do raise money, contrary to popular mythology. One thing I always say here is think about it. Women have raised money for others forever, for decades and decades and decades, for schools, for churches, for synagogues, for food pantries, for shelters, for services for homeless people, for children's programs, you name it. Women fundraisers have historically in so many communities been the backbone, the workers, the smarts in so many fundraising contexts. Those skills, that knowledge, that commitment is transferable, as is the overall commitment to making life better. So yes, another theme is women can raise the money. Third, women are efficient, and they efficiently and thoughtfully bring home the bacon, so to speak. So I can tell you from a colleague of mine at the University of Chicago Harris School, who has researched this for years, that women members are the most efficient at bringing home resources to their districts. Secondly, and this is in other research, women legislators do a pretty good job of coming together across party lines on intractable sort of bread and butter issues. And so if you think back on the US Senate in years past, on a couple occasions when there was really an impasse on the budget, it was the women senators who found a way to come together and get the budget together. So this efficiency and commitment to finding a way. And this next theme has to do with the fact that women candidates, women officials message about women's equality for every woman, right? And I want to stress every woman in this season of giving thanks, because we are in this nation with millions of poor families. The poorest of those are families headed by women who are raising children. And lest you think otherwise, those women need those voices for equality to ensure that they get the services, the support, the educational opportunity, the work opportunities they need. So this message about equality is for everyone, but I would say to you in this time, particularly for those who are most in need. So I want to then give you another theme that sort of runs through women making Herstory, which is that typically women seek public office to get something done, not to be famous or make money or, you know, get invited to the right parties or something like that. So by contrast, and I've heard this story dozens of times from my friends who are public officials, so many men wake up one morning and say, gee whiz, I want to be a state senator, or gee whiz, I want to run for this, or I want to run for that. The history, the Herstory has been that that's not the route that women take. They become engaged in public issues and community issues. They then say, well, what else can I do with this? And they choose a public office path because they want to do more. So I think that what we want to remember there is that if we really want public officials who are public servants, we would do well to elect more women. Related to this is the fact that women really study hard when they are thinking about running, when they're running, when they're elected. I can tell you also lots of stories about this. And a piece of that is that they tend to sort of work their way up the ladder. Now, this is changing a bit, but historically, this has been the case. And so, for instance, women may begin their study and work in the League of Women Voters, and then, as I said, choose a public path. So what we want to do is remember that, because that's a strand of thought and choice that runs through the women's activist community, that we want to encourage the women who want to do otherwise, which is to run for office or be appointed, to remember that that they know enough, right, to be in office, and that probably whatever they may not know yet, they will learn quite quickly. So it is the case, as I mentioned a moment ago, that increasingly women are choosing to, quote, run as you are. This is a term that the nonpartisan training organization Vote, Run, Lead has originated. And these women have come to the realization, which is correct, that there isn't just one image or one life experience or one family situation that makes a person qualified to hold office. This is key. You don't have to just look that way versus that way. So there are lots of examples of this. Women are starting out younger. A great recent example, for instance, is the woman who was elected mayor of Boston, Michelle Wu, who spent part of her childhood in Chicago. So those are key themes. I want to go now to lessons that I've sort of captured in my writing and speaking based on my experience of working with women leaders and, of course, my own experience as well. In my book, Every Day is Election Day. Early in the book, I have a section called 6 Easy Rules. And it's those rules that are essentially lessons that I want to talk with you about and share some stories related to them. So I want to, in that context, just remind you for a moment here of what is at stake right now and in the next few years to come as we think about what women are doing and how they can do it and how they can apply these lessons. The first thing is that in 2022, the entire US House of Representatives is up for election, along with 24 of the 100 senators. Likewise, of course, in 2024, the entire House of Representatives is up again, along with 33 Senate seats. And we will, of course, elect a president and a vice president. We're in a very contentious, tumultuous period in which these elections are going to occur, making them all the more important. And of course, during this time, significantly in some of the off years, tens of thousands of elections will take place at the local, state, and regional levels all over the country. There are, by the way, approximately 500,000 elected offices in the United States. And at the same time as this is going on, and as we're thinking about how we want to be involved, there is an ongoing need, an enormous need for people of goodwill and who want to be public servants to serve in appointed positions. And secondly, to lead organizations that provide a public service or advocate for the public good. So there's a lot of both opportunity and challenging activity, I would say, that we are looking at. So as I talk about these lessons, I want you just to recall, please, what I said a moment ago about the importance of electing women to executive office in particular. And that really is the focus, actually, of my book, Vote Her In, about a strategy for electing the president, but a woman president, but basically looking at the variables for women achieving executive office. There is significant progress in legislatures. It's not uniform across the country, but we have less than 20% of the governors are women. The number of women mayors of big cities is increasing slowly. And as I noted before, that is a particularly important focal point, I think, of our public work as we go forward for the reasons I stated. So here I am. I'm going to share with you these, so to speak, 6 easy rules. They're not necessarily easy, but they're easy in the sense that they're very clear, I believe. So not in order of importance, but in order of my writing them in the book. I think that probably does reflect something in my own mind about how I thought about this. The first one is you've got to want it bad. You may have to run, you may have to run again, you may have to run again in order to get elected or appointed or to achieve the kind of public voice that you want to have. And you cannot think that if you're sort of half-hearted about it, that's going to suffice, because it won't. So I want to share 2 stories with you here. Just, you probably know them, but just to put this in context, the first is a story about our Vice President, Kamala Harris, who, of course, wanted really bad, so to speak, to be the president. But that didn't happen for her. So think about what she then, turned and did do. She very quickly turned and campaigned really, really hard to be selected as the vice president. And why did she do that? I believe she wanted to serve, but she also wanted to position herself to run in the future. And of course, that means you got to want it bad too, because if you're going to run for president, you probably, you know, after one campaign's over, you're starting the next. My second example of wanting it really bad, so to speak, is about Liz Cheney. And this is a different kind of a story. I have such admiration for her bucking, so to speak, the Republican majority in the US Congress to stand up for what she and her family have always represented, which is working as a public official in a democracy, not a country that's run by someone with autocratic behaviors. So now everybody everywhere, not just the people of Wyoming, know who she is and likely respect her. She wanted it bad, right? To represent democracy and in the process, single herself out in the public eye. Nothing the matter with that in the context of achieving what I think is an admirable goal. The second lesson here is you have to outwork the competition every day, which means you just have to show up, do what you have to do, no matter how many times you've done it before, no matter how tired you may be. And I give you two stories on that front as well. The first is from Senator Amy Klobuchar, the senior senator from Minnesota, who also ran for the presidency. She did well. In fact, she lasted longer than Senator Harris did. She started out working in the White House when she was a kid, working for Vice President Mondale. She tells some funny stories about that. She's now 60-ish, and she's been, you know, trying to outwork the competition every day. I watched her this fall, as I'm sure you saw too, travel across the country campaigning for candidates from California to Virginia and back again. And why is she doing that? She's trying to outwork her competition also, so that if she is in the position, she can again run for president. Nothing the matter with that. Then I give you the example of Senator Lisa Murkowski, the Republican from Alaska, who, as you may recall, had to run in her first go round as a write-in. And boy, or should I say girl, did she work hard, right? And she won, and she's been reelected since. She's now become one of the most powerful senators because she sort of sits in a so-called moderate position where she can negotiate and broker legislative compromises, enormously important in this current day. She outworked her competition, no doubt about it. This next rule has to do with the notion that you must be willing to win in the same way that men do. Getting ready to run, running successfully, whether it's for appointed office, elected office, heading an organization, is about, so to speak, counting the votes, metaphorically, if not, you know, literally, and getting more than the next girl, right? This is not a gender-linked activity. So I give you two examples here, and one is our most recently confirmed Supreme Court Justice, Amy Coney Barrett. The second is US Senator Claire McCaskill, formerly representing the state of Missouri. In the case of Justice Barrett, she willingly accepted a nomination and was confirmed in less than a month, within a week before an election where the person, that is President Trump, who appointed her, was the loser. And by contrast, of course, Mitch McConnell, who led the campaign for her, held up Merrick Garland's appointment for 11 months during the Obama administration. I say this to make the point that Justice Barrett seized the opportunity, withstood the criticism that she did receive on that, and she's now a sitting justice. And she won the same way men do. I'm sure there are stories like that with other Supreme Court justices, not to mention other public figures. In the case of Claire McCaskill, you probably know she lost her last election, and what did she do in terms of thinking the way the men do? Well, what do these guys do? So many of them, they become pundits, right? They go on TV, they make goo-gaws of money, and they tell us probably things you already know. But in the case of Senator McCaskill, she figured out how to do that kind of work. She now is another one of those talking heads. You may like or dislike what she has to say, but she has positioned herself nationally to be a voice on the matters she cares about. It is also true, and this is the next lesson, that you only win with and for women. For two reasons. It's both the political power of sisterhood, make no mistake about that, and the fact that you can, as a woman who cares about what's best for women, advocate for issues that most women support. For instance, equal pay, better childcare, access to health services. So I believe you win when you are with and for women on these matters that every woman cares about. So two examples here. The first is Betty Ford, First Lady, which of course, like it or not, is a political position. They advocate for issues, they develop programs, they give speeches, they do all this kind of thing. Betty Ford was an amazing spokesperson, both on matters related to women's health and on the equal rights movement. And uniquely, I think up to that point, with the possible exception of Eleanor Roosevelt, really demonstrated the power, the voice of the First Lady's office. And I think as such became a very influential, so to speak, politician in the most positive sense. My second example is Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, a Democrat from New York, who has made legislation benefiting women her calling card. You may know about her work on women in the military. It's really pretty wonderful. She is steadfast on that matter and on others as well. And in both of these cases, in Ford's case, in Gillibrand's case, they are winning. They are winning with women. They are winning for themselves as influential public voices. So you only win with and for women is my belief, because that's what you're here to do, to serve the people. Two more lessons and I'll stop talking real fast. One is winning is not a one-off. Every day is election day. People are sizing you up every day. So two quick examples. One is my friend Jan Schakowsky, member of Congress from the North Shore, in a safe district. But what does she do? She runs one of the best district service offices I've ever seen. Haven't seen them all, but anyone and everyone. She has a large immigrant community in her district. It's a very diverse community. She runs because she knows every day is election day, meaning to her that it is election day for serving people for what they need. My second example here is another woman who did something similar back in the day, Republican Catherine St. George, who was a long-time member, U.S. representative in Congress from suburbs of New York City in the 40s and the 50s. And I'm told she was a really good, so to speak, public servant. I know a bit about this. My father actually ran against her in 1958. And, you know, he had some different positions on the issues than she did, but of course, he respected the work that she had done. Last, I want to just say, and this is the close here of my remarks, that campaigning, whether it's for an elected office, an appointed office, to head an organization, to be influential in some way, are two different experiences. Forget this and rue the day. And I will just say to you quickly from my own personal experience, having been in public office, I say this knowingly. The first is just a quick example from being on the Illinois Human Rights Commission, where I really hoped that we could develop certain sort of class action suits to help people in need. That was not really something we were able to do. It was really individual cases, which of course was great. But had we been able to do more of these class actions, perhaps we would have been able to help more people. So I say here that just be aware of the fact that it's going to be a different experience when you're actually sitting in that chair. So I just want to close now by saying that these are all ideas I share with you in the context of making her story your story. And in my book, which is really a guide to figuring out your own plan for that, I really kind of underscore the point that her story is every woman's story. And that's what I want to close with. You don't have to be rich, you don't have to be famous, you don't have to, you know, whatever other things people may think. We all have the power within ourselves to create her story and thereby help other women. So I will stop talking and be pleased to answer any questions and have a conversation with you. Thank you all for listening.
Thank you, Rebecca. And I invite everyone just to type your questions in the Q&A and we'll ask them and get you an answer. In the meantime, while we're waiting for our first questions to come in, Rebecca, I just have a question. Well, a couple from listening to your inspirational message. Do you think it's from the time you wrote the book till now, have things changed in this hyper-partisanship and the way the rhetoric has changed, that women will face additional challenges of character and abilities?
You know what? I don't know if you all remember this, but I remember when I was working for Harold Washington, when he was mayor and when he was running, and he had this expression, I don't think he originated it, in which he said, politics ain't beanbag. And, you know, I had anyone who participates in public life will get bruised. So, and that sort of just goes with the territory. I mean, you're right that we are in a particularly sort of fractious moment for a variety of reasons, but I sort of feel that the women who decide to step up and step out are women who have to know that that's the case. So while it may be more difficult than it might be in more peaceable times, I think that they know they have to be prepared, and to the extent that they need to be additionally prepared because of the nature of the environment, I really hope they seek out advice, for instance, from mentors or other people that they're working with or serving with about, you know, how to deal with this sort of an environment.
Is there a program or a group that you know of for anyone who's interested in running for public office? Here in Illinois, of course, people start taking up petitions in January.
Right.
So this is timely for them to start thinking about it and getting ready. Are there groups of support for women or mentors for people thinking to run for office?
There are a number of nonpartisan organizations that provide training for women who want to serve in a variety of public leadership roles. I mentioned Vote, Run, Lead as one. If you go to an organization on the web called the Ascend Fund, which is a philanthropy that supports a number of these organizations, you'll see a list of their partners. There are also, of course, the training organizations within the party contexts on the Democratic side and on the Republican side. But one wonderful thing that's happened over the last decade has been the incredible growth in the number of and ways in which women can be trained. And I think that's, we're now seeing the results of that there are more women serving in certain kinds of positions than even just a decade ago. I would note in that context that one of the most notable changes is mayors of big cities.
Is there an organization that's actively recruiting women candidates? Is that Emily's List, or is there an organization that specifically seeks them out, women?
Well, I think that's, yes, the organizations like Emily's List on the Democratic side, and I think it's called Susan B. Anthony Fund on the Republican side is one. They do encourage women and talk to them if they're interested, and if they think they've got the, you know, the stuff, then they do recruit them. Of course, the parties do that too. I think that, but I do think the most important thing is it's still the case that a lot of these sort of informal, so to speak, locker room networks still exist, so that if you're someone who wants to be the head of the school board, or be on the plan commission or the zoning commission or whatever it is, put yourself out there, speak up for yourself, go to those meetings where you understand these kinds of appointments or decisions are going to be made, and put yourself out there, and, you know, bring all your girlfriends with you, right? It's waiting to be noticed is not a plan.
Joyce has a question for you. She says, you mentioned that generally when women run, women win.
Right.
Can you comment on what happened in the case of Hillary Clinton?
I can. What I meant when I said when women run, women win is they don't win every race. It means that, as I tried to say, that if they position themselves as really good candidates, the odds are very good, but they're not always going to want to, and they're not always going to win. So in the case of Hillary Clinton, my own take on that, I actually had a couple of sentences on that, but I cut them out in the interest of time. One of the sort of true, both in the context of when she ran in the Democratic primary in 2008 against President Obama, and then in 2016 as the candidate against President Trump, she was defeated by men with much less experience for the job at hand. At that time, Barack Obama was a junior US Senator. He'd been elected for a couple of years. Before that, he'd been in the Illinois State Senate, a professor, written a wonderful book. In the case of Donald Trump, of course, he had no prior elected or appointed political experience that I'm aware of. So I think I would say there that, you know, the continuing truth, which is why you have to speak up for yourself, is that gender discrimination is profound and it continues to exist. And it in my view, that's one example. I mean, if the positions were reversed, had a woman run who had no public experience, had a woman run who'd served for a couple of years in the US Senate, I think that the evaluation of those candidacies would have been very different.
Interesting. Do you think that we'll be ready for a woman president in 2024?
We've been ready for a woman president for a couple of decades at least, right? You know, the readiness factor, as we were just discussing a moment ago, is, you know, I mean, think about Barbara Mikulski, who first ran for US Congress to be a member of Congress in 1976, and then became a US Senator, I believe the longest serving woman in US government in history. And could she have, I mean, if you take, she could have run decades ago, and not something she wanted to do. She wanted to be in the Senate. So I think that the sort of readiness matter is a combination of both. Are there people who want to do it, and do the people who want to do it sense that the climate is conducive? And I think we would all probably agree that the climate at the time, say, if Barbara Mikulski would have decided to do that, was not right. That was still a time when, you know, that was in 1992, they called that the year of the woman, and there were 6 women elected, I believe.
Right.
And so, you know, things have changed considerably. So while people may have been ready, I think we're now much more in a context where so many more women are serving that it seems more, so to speak, natural.
Do you another Barbara asked a question. Do you think elected women are doing a good job in elevating other women to office?
The ones that I know and work with are, they are terrific mentors, advisors, supporters, campaigners. I work with a lot of women officials, and I see that in them. So if there are some out there who don't choose to do that, if there are men out there who don't choose to support other people running, shame on them. But I do not at all subscribe, and it isn't in my experience that people are selfish about the position they're in and don't want to share their resources. One example of that I would give you, I think it's probably true on the Republican side, but certainly on the Democratic side here in Illinois, Jan Schakowsky, Lauren Underwood, Robin Kelly, and there are probably others too, raise significant sums of money to help other candidates run. And of course, that's a particularly vital thing to be doing. They need, new candidates need that support. So I do think women are supporting other women, and it gives me great joy to see it and sometimes to participate in making it happen.
Well, and I think that goes along with Candace just mentioned in the Q&A that she had a friend that ran for Congress and had a terrible time relentlessly asking for money.
Yeah.
And so it was just nice to hear you say that people are running should maybe talk to other female office holders, and they may be able to help them raise money, or at least help them do the outreach and what's effective in outreach.
Oh, absolutely. And I think, for the person who, whether it's Lauren Underwood or take your pick, but, if you're a person, whether it's in elected office or appointed office, or you're running a business or a charitable organization, whatever it is, if you help other people succeed, right? It's not only the right thing to do, it makes you more powerful. Think about it.
Yeah.
I mean, you can call on those people you've assisted and say, gee whiz, I have this bill, I really want to get it passed. Will you sign on to it? Or have this candidate who's running and she really needs help. Will you help me help her? And by being helpful to other people, you demonstrate your own goodwill, but you also demonstrate the responsibilities that ought to be undertaken if you want to be considered a leader. That's, I think, how I see it. And I guess I would say from my own personal experience and from that of others I've worked with, unless we develop a bench, right? Unless we have a lot of people really helping each other out, the policy agendas that we want to implement are not going to happen. So it doesn't behoove anybody to be narrow-minded in this respect. I don't believe, unless they have some sort of superpowers, which not many people do,
Well, and we're lucky here in DuPage that we have Senators Laura Ellman, Representative Tara Costa Howard. We have Representative Rahr. We have Senator Karina Villa, Maria. We have several women who can definitely help mentor here in DuPage to get women involved, which is excellent.
Right. And there's no substitute for that. I mean, I would just say, I mentor formally and informally, as I'm sure you do too, a number of younger women. And that's the wonderful thing about being older and more experienced, right? Or even being, not so old, right? Is that you really can help other people find a way to be of service, to be a leader, to have influence, to have power. So I think there's also a lot of joy that comes from it that people sometimes forget. It's kind of like, if you're a parent and you saw your kid walk for the first time, well, you help them get to that place, right? Well, in an analogous sense, if you're in this civic and public leadership world and you help someone else stand up straight and walk and win, you're going to experience a lot of joy from that as well.
And I know myself and others, we really appreciate when we see the younger women now taking up the banner that we carried and that it becomes important to them. We do have a question about the way women are treated. Nazish, and I apologize if I've mispronounced your name, just made a comment that she finds the silence surrounding the way AOC and Rashida Tlaib and Omar Ilham are being treated as horrifying. These women wanted to make a difference, but look at the price they have to pay. How is this acceptable? And what can we do as women to stop those sorts of attacks and stand up for the fellow legislators that are trying to make a difference?
Well, I think that in the first place, the most powerful thing each of us can do that is only time, it's no money, it's easy, but it's so important, is to make sure that we take responsibility for engaging with our circles of friends and associates about what's happening. And if we see something that we think is wrong, to call it out, to explain why, to ask others to understand it in the same way we do, and then perhaps be public about it. So I think that while there are a lot of women in public life who get blasphemed in various ways. And so the next piece of it is they're hearing from us, because I think that, they're just like we are. They worry about the same things we worry about. So hearing from people, whether constituents or not, that we're here for you, right? And if you need us to write letters of support for your legislation or whatever it is, we're going to do that. I think another piece of it specifically is, if you're really interested in seeing someone, for instance, a member of Congress like those you mentioned, be reelected and be able to withstand the criticism, you can send money, you can do phone banking, you can help get out the vote, you can identify people in their districts who can work for them. So there's a lot of different ways to support women in the public eye who are being pressed.
I know we're running short on time, but I do want to ask you one last question, if that's okay. How can we, you talked about in your youth that public service was ingrained in you by your parents. How can we help rejuvenate that sense of public service in today's youth? Many of us are worried that feeling of helping others is going away. Any ideas on how we can rejuvenate that?
Yeah,
Sounds like another book, probably. I'm sorry to put you on.
I hope somebody writes that book, because we all need to know how to make that happen. I guess what I would say is, I guess each of us in our own way, whatever role we're playing in the public square, has the opportunity to bring some young people with us, right? Way back when there was, take your daughter to work, right? Remember that?
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
the idea was, that was done at a time when there were many fewer women in corporations, particularly in significant positions, than there are today. And so the idea was, take those girls to work, let them see what's going on, let them feel and get a sense of, this is something I can do, and what the rewards are. And so I guess this sounds sort of simple-minded, but I do think that because the environment is so unpleasant at times these days, that having young people share with you the joyful moments. So I'm just one quick example from my own life. Next week, I'm going to be laying a wreath. This is done every year at the tomb of Mayor Washington. He was in the military, to honor him. And, that's a kind of experience that's going to be touching to anybody, right? So
Right.
if there are experiences where you can invite, younger people to see and hear and watch, learn about someone who was a public servant, I guess maybe they could realize the import of it. But by all means, I hope someone out there writes the book with all the good ideas about how we can do that.
Oh, well, our time is up, and thank you so much. And I hope someone out there has been enthusiastically thinking and going, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do it. In the meantime, I'm going to turn the program over to Sarah Allen. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Sarah, I believe you're muted. Can you
hear me?
Yes,
Can you hear me now? Thank
Yes.
you. Thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight for our Civic Awareness Seminar webinar with author Rebecca Sive. Rebecca, wow. Thank you for a very delightful and inspiring presentation. It really brings all of us who are here as leaguers and people from the community to step up and think about what can we as individuals and as a group, as an organization like the League of Women Voters, work to help promote and encourage women to run for elected office. Quickly, the League of Women Voters of Glen Ellen would like to remind its members of two upcoming events. Thursday, December 2nd, our holiday fundraiser at 10,000 Villages. And on Thursday, January 20th, 2022, our community meeting on the Glen Ellen State of the Village. And the League of Women Voters of Wheaton would also like to remind you about the upcoming Civic Awareness Program on January 13th on a very timely issue on critical race theory, what it is and what it is not. Please check out both of our League organizations' websites. And again, thank you, Rebecca. Thank you, everyone who came. Happy holidays, everyone, and good night.